This is my ranking of single-player games that I've played based purely on my personal experience. Each one is placed from masterpiece down to trash, depending on how strong the story and gameplay are, how engaging the world feels, and how well the experience holds up. Let's get straight into the list. Red Dead Redemption 2 started feeling special the moment I entered its world and slowly rode through the snowy mountains with the gang. I liked how every town, camp, and random encounter felt alive, and Arthur Morgan became a character I cared about more as the story continued. The slower pacing made the world feel believable to me, especially during long rides, hunting trips, and quiet conversations around campfires. Gunfights were simple, but the atmosphere, music, and attention to detail carried almost every moment. I also spent hours ignoring missions just to explore forests, lakes, and small side activities because the world constantly rewarded curiosity. Even after finishing the story, several scenes stayed in my mind for a very long time afterward. Few single-player games reach this level of quality today. This belongs in the masterpiece tier. Ghost of Tsushima immediately caught my attention with its beautiful world, especially while riding through fields, forests, and quiet villages during sunset. I liked how the wind guided exploration instead of filling the screen with markers because it made traveling feel natural and relaxing. The sword combat stayed fun for the entire game since switching stances and reacting to different enemy types kept battles active and rewarding. I also enjoyed starting fights with standoffs because those moments felt straight out of a samurai movie. The story became stronger as Jin slowly changed from a traditional samurai into someone willing to break old rules to protect his people. Even simple activities like fox shrines and bamboo strikes stayed entertaining much longer than I expected. This clearly deserves a spot in my excellent tier without question. The Last of Us Part 2 kept making me uncomfortable in the best possible way because every major moment carried emotional weight and difficult choices. I liked how the story focused on revenge, grief, and violence without trying to make everything feel heroic or satisfying. The combat felt tense during almost every encounter since enemies searched aggressively, called out to each other, and forced me to constantly move around. I also enjoyed exploring abandoned buildings and ruined streets because small environmental details quietly told stories without needing long explanations. Ellie felt more human as the game continued, especially during quieter scenes where conversations revealed her fears and anger. The animations, voice acting, and sound design made many scenes hit harder than I expected while playing. This belongs in my masterpiece tier without hesitation. Super Mario Odyssey kept surprising me almost every hour because each kingdom introduced new ideas, mechanics, and creative platforming challenges. I liked how capturing enemies with Cappy constantly changed the gameplay, since every creature controlled differently and opened new ways to explore levels. The movement also felt incredibly smooth, especially while chaining jumps, dives, and wall kicks together across large areas. I spent a lot of time collecting power moons because exploration always rewarded curiosity with hidden challenges, secrets, or fun side activities. The Metro Kingdom became my favorite area because it felt completely different from anything I expected in a Mario game. I also loved how the game mixed classic 2D sections into the 3D world without slowing the pacing down. Even after finishing the story, I still wanted to keep discovering more. This stands inside my masterpiece tier. Uncharted 4: A Thief's End felt like a huge adventure movie from start to finish, especially during the massive action scenes and dangerous climbing sections. I liked how Nathan Drake felt older and more thoughtful this time, because the story focused more on his relationships and personal struggles instead of non-stop explosions. The gameplay stayed fun because combat arenas allowed different approaches, whether I wanted stealth or direct shootouts. I also enjoyed using the grappling hook during exploration since it made traversal feel faster and more exciting across large environments. The visuals constantly stood out too, especially during jungle areas, city chases, and quiet moments near the ocean. Even simple conversations between characters made the journey feel natural and believable. This settles nicely into my excellent tier. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 quickly made me feel like I was living inside a harsh medieval world instead of playing a normal fantasy RPG. I liked how every fight felt dangerous because timing, stamina, and weapon control mattered much more than fast button mashing during battles. The world also stayed interesting during long sessions since towns, forests, and side quests constantly introduced memorable characters and unexpected situations. I spent a lot of time improving Henry's skills, crafting gear, and becoming stronger through practice instead of instant upgrades. The story became more engaging as political conflicts and personal revenge slowly mixed together across emotional moments and large battles. I also enjoyed solving quests through speech, preparation, or combat depending on the situation. This proudly earns a place in my excellent tier. Devil May Cry 5 instantly became fun once I started chaining long combos together while switching weapons, dodging attacks, and launching enemies through the air. I liked how each playable character felt completely different because Nero, Dante, and V all changed the pace of combat in unique ways. Dante ended up being my favorite since his huge weapon variety allowed crazy combo possibilities during fights against large groups and difficult bosses. The combat also stayed rewarding because the game cared more about style and creativity instead of simply defeating enemies quickly. I enjoyed replaying missions just to improve rankings and experiment with different abilities that I unlocked later in the story. The music made battles even more exciting, especially when songs became louder as combo ranks increased during combat. This easily slices its way into my excellent tier. Days Gone took a while before it finally clicked with me, but once the world opened up and stronger enemies started appearing, I became much more invested. I liked traveling across Oregon on the motorcycle because managing fuel, repairs, and dangerous roads made simple trips feel tense sometimes. The Freakers also became far more interesting later since massive hordes forced me to prepare traps, explosives, and escape routes before every fight. I enjoyed how Deacon slowly became stronger over time because the early hours intentionally made survival feel difficult and exhausting. The story improved gradually too, especially once more characters and camps started receiving proper development during the middle sections. Random events in the open world kept exploration entertaining since wolves, enemies, and freakers could suddenly appear and completely change situations. It gets a place in my great tier. BioShock Infinite immediately stood out because the floating city of Columbia looked beautiful while also feeling strange, unsettling, and dangerous at the same time. I liked slowly exploring different areas, listening to conversations, and discovering how the world functioned beneath its bright appearance. The combat became more enjoyable once I started mixing weapons, skyhook movement, and vigors together during larger fights against groups of enemies. Elizabeth also made the journey better because she constantly interacted with the environment and helped during combat without becoming annoying. The story kept me curious the entire way, since every major reveal slowly changed how I viewed Booker, Columbia, and the events happening around them. I especially enjoyed the quieter moments where the game focused more on atmosphere instead of non-stop action sequences. This comfortably fits into my excellent tier. Assassin's Creed 4. Black Flag quickly became addictive once I started sailing across the Caribbean, searching for islands, enemy ships, and hidden treasure. I liked how the game focused heavily on freedom and exploration, because simply traveling across the ocean often felt more entertaining than following the main story missions. Naval combat stayed exciting throughout the adventure, since upgrading the Jackdaw slowly transformed it into a powerful pirate ship capable of destroying massive enemy fleets. Edward Kenway also felt refreshing compared to earlier protagonists because he cared more about survival, money, and adventure instead of acting serious during every scene. I spent hours hunting sea creatures, exploring underwater wrecks, and attacking forts because the world constantly rewarded curiosity with memorable discoveries and useful upgrades without losing momentum during exploration. This sails into my masterpiece tier. Baldur's Gate 3 completely absorbed my attention because nearly every choice, conversation, and battle felt meaningful throughout the entire adventure. I liked how the game constantly rewarded creativity, whether I solved problems through dialogue, stealth, magic, or simply causing chaos during difficult situations. The companions also became a huge part of the experience since their personalities, stories, and relationships slowly developed over dozens of hours. Combat stayed exciting because every encounter forced me to think carefully about positioning, abilities, environmental traps, and enemy weaknesses instead of repeating the same strategy repeatedly. I also spent a massive amount of time exploring hidden areas, finding side quests, and experimenting with different decisions just to see unexpected outcomes. Very few RPGs make exploration and player freedom feel this rewarding from beginning to end. This easily gets a place in my masterpiece tier. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt became unforgettable once I started wandering through its massive world and discovering how much detail existed beyond the main story. I liked how side quests often felt just as important as major missions because even small choices could completely change outcomes later. Geralt also became a character I enjoyed following since his calm personality balanced well against the brutal world surrounding him. Combat stayed entertaining because mixing swordplay, signs, potions, and oils made monster hunts feel tactical instead of repetitive during longer sessions. I spent countless hours exploring villages, forests, swamps, and hidden ruins because there was almost always another contract, secret, or storyline waiting nearby. The music and atmosphere made every region feel distinct, especially during darker quests involving curses and war. This deserves a place in my masterpiece tier. Black Myth Wukong immediately grabbed my attention because the combat felt fast, aggressive, and satisfying during nearly every major boss fight. I liked how the game balanced difficult encounters with powerful abilities, since learning attack patterns and using spells properly made victories feel rewarding instead of frustrating. The transformations also kept combat fresh, because switching into different creatures completely changed how certain fights played out against stronger enemies. I spent plenty of time exploring hidden paths and optional areas because the game constantly rewarded curiosity with upgrades, secrets, and challenging bosses. The world itself looked incredible too, especially the forests, snowy mountains, and massive temples filled with detailed environments and beautiful visual effects. Technical issues became frustrating occasionally, but the strong combat and memorable boss battles kept me invested from beginning to end. I am placing it in my excellent tier. God of War felt great from the start because Kratos felt much deeper and more emotional compared to the older games in the series before it. I liked how the story focused heavily on the relationship between Kratos and Atreus, since their journey slowly changed both characters throughout the adventure together. Combat also stayed extremely satisfying because throwing and recalling the Leviathan axe never stopped feeling powerful during battles against monsters, trolls, and gods across the world. I spent plenty of time exploring optional areas, solving puzzles, and searching for upgrades because the world constantly rewarded exploration with useful gear and interesting lore discoveries. The Norse setting looked incredible too, especially snowy mountains, ancient ruins, and massive creatures appearing during important story moments throughout the journey. This easily can be a part of my masterpiece tier. Dying Light became much more fun once I learned how to move across rooftops quickly while avoiding huge groups of zombies below the streets. I liked how the parkour system made simple exploration exciting because jumping, climbing, and escaping through narrow buildings always kept movement fast and satisfying. The nights were easily my favorite part since Stronger Infected completely changed the atmosphere and forced me to survive carefully instead of fighting everything directly. Combat also improved steadily because unlocking new abilities slowly turned weak weapons into brutal tools for destroying zombies in creative ways. I spent a lot of time doing side quests because many of them became far more interesting and darker than I expected at first. The open world stayed entertaining for dozens of hours. This secures a position in my excellent tier. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 immediately became exciting because switching between Peter Parker and Miles Morales kept both the story and gameplay feeling fresh. I liked how web swinging felt faster and smoother this time, especially while using the web wings to glide across huge parts of New York City. Combat also stayed entertaining because the new abilities, parries, and symbiote powers made fights feel more aggressive and cinematic during larger battles. The story became stronger once Venom and Kraven entered the picture, since both characters added tension and emotional moments throughout the campaign. I also enjoyed many quieter scenes between friends and family because they helped the characters feel more human outside the superhero action. Some side activities became repetitive after many hours, but the movement and combat remained consistently fun until the end. This swings into my excellent tier. The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom kept giving me reasons to ignore the main objective because every area of Hyrule hid something interesting worth exploring nearby. I liked how the game allowed complete freedom during exploration, since caves, sky islands, and underground regions constantly led to secrets, puzzles, and unexpected discoveries. The building system also became much more entertaining than I expected, because creating strange vehicles and machines completely changed how I traveled across the massive world. Combat stayed fun too, especially with weapon fusion allowing me to experiment with ridiculous combinations during battles against stronger enemies and difficult bosses later. I spent dozens of hours getting distracted by side quests, shrines, and random discoveries because the world rarely stopped rewarding curiosity during exploration. This goes inside my masterpiece tier. Shadow of the Colossus felt completely different from most games because the world stayed quiet, empty, and mysterious during almost the entire journey. I liked how every Colossus battle felt massive and unforgettable, since figuring out how to climb each creature became just as important as defeating it afterward. Traveling across the lonely world with Agro also made the adventure feel strangely emotional because there were very few characters or distractions along the way. The soundtrack became another huge part of the experience, since the music changed perfectly during intense fights and quieter exploration moments. I spent a lot of time simply riding across the landscape because the atmosphere alone made the world feel memorable and unique compared to other games. Even years later, several Colossus fights still remain clear in my mind today. Easily a masterpiece tier game. Detroit Become Human kept me interested because almost every major decision changed how the story unfolded for each main character afterward. I liked switching between Connor, Marcus, and Kara since all three stories felt different and showed separate sides of the world. The choices also carried real tension because I constantly worried about making mistakes that could permanently change relationships or kill important characters unexpectedly. I spent a lot of time replaying chapters just to see different outcomes because the branching paths actually felt meaningful instead of creating tiny changes only. The world itself looked detailed and believable too, especially the darker version of future Detroit, filled with android workers and social problems. Some dialogue became heavy-handed during emotional moments, but the performances and story choices kept me invested until the ending. For me, it gets a place in the great tier. Far Cry 3 hooked me once the island fully opened up, and I started attacking pirate camps using different strategies every single time afterward. I liked how the combat gave so much freedom because I could use stealth, animals, explosives, or direct gunfights depending on the situation around me. The tropical setting also stayed memorable throughout the adventure, since jungles, beaches, caves, and enemy camps all felt dangerous and visually distinct from each other. Voss easily became the standout character because his unpredictable behavior made every scene involving him tense, strange, and entertaining to watch unfold. I also enjoyed upgrading Jason through hunting, crafting equipment, and unlocking stronger combat abilities across the island during exploration. Even simple exploration stayed rewarding because there were always side activities, collectibles, or hidden locations worth discovering nearby. This secures a position inside my excellent tier. Elden Ring kept giving me unforgettable moments because nearly every direction I explored led to dangerous enemies, hidden areas, or massive bosses waiting unexpectedly. I liked how the world trusted me to explore freely without constantly filling the screen with objectives or map markers everywhere. Combat also stayed rewarding because every difficult fight forced me to learn enemy patterns, improve my timing, and slowly become stronger through better gear and abilities. I spent countless hours exploring castles, caves, underground cities, and secret paths because curiosity almost always led to valuable rewards or incredible discoveries. The boss fights became some of my favorite moments since many of them looked massive, intimidating, and visually unforgettable during battles. Even after finishing the game, I still felt like there were huge parts of the world left unexplored by me. This unquestionably stands among my masterpiece tier. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 felt mysterious, emotional, and constantly filled with tension from beginning to end throughout the entire journey across its strange world. I liked how the turn-based combat stayed active and engaging since dodging, parrying, and timing attacks correctly mattered during every difficult battle against dangerous enemies. Each party member also felt unique because their abilities and mechanics completely changed how I approached fights against stronger bosses and optional encounters later. The story became more powerful as the group faced grief, sacrifice, and hopeless situations while still trying to protect future generations from destruction and suffering. I also enjoyed exploring optional locations because hidden bosses, secrets, and side content rewarded curiosity with meaningful upgrades or discoveries. The soundtrack added even more emotion during important scenes and battles throughout the adventure. This deserves a place in the excellent tier. Horizon Forbidden West stood out because the world looked beautiful almost everywhere I traveled, especially during sunsets, snowy mountains, and ruined cities covered by thick vegetation and wildlife. I liked fighting the machine creatures because targeting specific parts and weaknesses made combat feel more tactical than simply firing arrows non-stop during battles. Aloy also stayed enjoyable to follow since her journey mixed personal struggles with larger problems affecting the entire world around her. I spent plenty of time exploring side activities, hidden ruins, and smaller quests because the map constantly rewarded curiosity with useful upgrades and interesting lore discoveries throughout the adventure. The different weapons kept combat entertaining too, especially traps, explosive spikes, and elemental attacks against stronger enemies later in the game. Some climbing sections felt awkward occasionally, but the adventure still earns a place in the great tier. Titanfall 2 felt exciting almost the entire time, because the movement system made running, wall running, and double jumping incredibly smooth and satisfying during every mission. I liked how the campaign constantly introduced new ideas, since almost every level added fresh mechanics, platforming sections, or combat situations that changed the pacing. BT also became a huge part of the experience because the relationship between him and Jack Cooper slowly grew stronger throughout the story. The combat stayed fun because switching between fast pilot gameplay and massive Titan battles kept encounters varied all the time. I spent plenty of time experimenting with different weapons and Titan loadouts because each one completely changed how battles played against stronger enemies and bosses later. This lands in the excellent tier. Death Stranding 2 on the beach felt far more engaging because the gameplay added stronger combat, better tools, and more freedom during dangerous missions across Australia afterward. I liked preparing for deliveries before every trip since choosing the right weapons, ladders, vehicles, and equipment made survival much easier during longer journeys across rough terrain. The world also stayed interesting because storms, earthquakes, and supernatural threats constantly changed how I approached different areas, routes, and dangerous missions throughout the adventure. Combat became much more enjoyable too, especially while sneaking through enemy camps or using strange weapons during larger battles against dangerous enemies and terrifying bosses later. I also enjoyed the quieter moments while driving across empty landscapes because the music and atmosphere created a relaxing feeling between intense missions. This strongly deserves a place in the excellent tier. Disco Elysium stood apart from other RPGs because conversations, choices, and skill checks mattered far more than combat or traditional action systems throughout the entire experience. I liked how the detectives' thoughts constantly argued with each other since it made even simple decisions strange, funny, and surprisingly emotional during the story. The murder investigation also stayed interesting because every clue slowly uncovered deeper political problems, personal struggles, and hidden truths about the world around me. I spent a huge amount of time talking to characters because the dialogue stayed intelligent, unpredictable, and filled with memorable moments during almost every conversation throughout the adventure. Kim Kitsuragi also became one of my favorite companions since his calm personality balanced perfectly against the detective's chaotic behavior and terrible decisions constantly. This unquestionably deserves a place inside my masterpiece tier. Yakuza Like a Dragon became entertaining very quickly because Ichiban Kasuga brought so much energy, humor, and emotion into almost every scene throughout the entire story afterward. I liked how the game switched from real-time combat to turn-based battles, since the different jobs and abilities made fights more strategic and varied during encounters. The story also balanced serious drama with ridiculous side content in a way that somehow worked surprisingly well together without ruining emotional moments. I spent hours doing side quests, karaoke, arcade games, and random activities because the world kept distracting me with funny or memorable moments throughout the city. Ichiban also stood out as a protagonist because he was emotional, loyal, reckless, and far more relatable than many typical RPG heroes today. This comfortably earns its place inside the excellent tier. Grand Theft Auto V gave me non-stop variety because every mission introduced different situations, vehicles, locations, or ridiculous action sequences throughout the story afterward. I liked switching between Michael, Franklin, and Trevor, since each character brought different personalities, skills, and perspectives into the larger storyline across Los Santos. The open world stayed entertaining for countless hours because random events, side activities, and hidden details constantly rewarded exploration everywhere I traveled. Driving around the city never became boring either, especially while listening to radio stations filled with funny advertisements, music, and conversations mocking modern culture. The heist missions easily became my favorite moments because planning robberies and escaping shootouts created cinematic sequences during the campaign. Very few open-world games match this level of freedom and detail today. This unquestionably goes to the masterpiece tier. That's my ranking of the single-player games. Some of these games stayed with me long after the ending, while others kept me hooked purely through gameplay, exploration, and unforgettable worlds. Thanks for watching.